Yo, it's Dr. Cool. Dawn of the 21st century saw the rise of a new global force, BRICS. This acronym, representing Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, promised a new era of South-South cooperation. The formation of BRICS was seen as a significant shift in the global economic landscape, challenging the dominance of Western powers. Africa, a continent grappling with the legacies of colonialism and seeking a path to sustainable development, was particularly receptive to BRICS's overtures. The continent's rich resources and strategic location made it an attractive partner for BRICS nations looking to expand their influence and economic reach. BRICS's engagement in Africa centered around infrastructure development, trade, and resource partnerships. These initiatives were seen as a way to unlock Africa's potential, providing the necessary infrastructure to support economic growth and development. These initiatives were packaged as a departure from the often conditional aid and loans offered by Western institutions. Instead of imposing stringent conditions, BRICS countries emphasized mutual benefit and respect, aiming to create a more balanced and equitable partnership. BRICS presented itself as a partner that understood the unique challenges faced by developing nations, offering a model of cooperation based on mutual benefit and respect. This approach resonated with many African leaders who were eager to find alternatives to the traditional Western-dominated aid structures. China, with its ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, emerged as a key player in BRICS's African strategy. The initiative aimed to create a vast network of trade routes and infrastructure projects, linking China with Africa and other parts of the world. Massive infrastructure projects ranging from railways and ports to energy grids and telecommunications networks were launched across the continent. These projects were not only intended to improve connectivity within Africa, but also to integrate the continent more closely with global trade networks. These projects were touted as catalysts for economic growth and regional integration. By improving infrastructure, BRICS aimed to facilitate trade, attract investment, and create jobs, ultimately driving economic development in Africa. BRICS's initial foray into Africa was met with optimism. The promise of large-scale investments and the prospect of a more equitable global order resonated deeply with many African governments and citizens. The promise of large-scale investments, access to new technologies, and a more equitable global order resonated deeply with many African governments and citizens. The potential for technology transfer and capacity building was seen as a significant advantage of partnering with BRICS nations. However, as the years passed, a more complex picture began to emerge. While the initial promise was grand, the reality of implementing these projects and ensuring their sustainability proved to be more challenging than anticipated. Beneath the veneer of partnership and shared prosperity, a different reality was taking shape. While the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, promoted an image of mutual growth and development, the ground realities in Africa painted a more complex picture. African think tanks and investigative journalists began to raise concerns about the true nature of BRICS's engagement. They questioned whether these partnerships were genuinely beneficial for African nations, or if they were merely a facade for a new form of economic dominance. Leaked documents and independent analyses revealed a pattern of exploitative practices that benefited BRICS members at the expense of their African partners. These revelations sparked debates and discussions across the continent, urging a re-evaluation of these international relationships. One of the most alarming discoveries was the prevalence of debt trap diplomacy. This strategy involved offering large loans for infrastructure projects which, on the surface, seemed like a boon for development. However, countries like Kenya found themselves saddled with unsustainable debt burdens after accepting loans for large-scale infrastructure projects from China. These debts became a heavy financial strain, limiting the country's ability to invest in other critical areas, such as healthcare and education. When these projects failed to generate the promised economic returns, African governments were left vulnerable to pressure from their BRICS creditors. This often resulted in the loss of control over key national assets and resources. Resource exploitation emerged as another point of contention. BRICS corporations, often backed by their governments, secured lucrative contracts for mining and oil extraction in resource-rich African countries. However, these deals often lacked transparency and resulted in minimal benefits for local communities. The environmental and social costs were frequently overlooked, leading to long-term damage and discontent among the local population. Furthermore, the influx of BRICS-linked technology companies, particularly from China, raised concerns about digital colonialism. The widespread adoption of Chinese technology, coupled with weak regulatory frameworks in many African countries, raised fears about data security and surveillance. As these issues came to light, there was a growing call for greater scrutiny and accountability in BRICS's dealings with African nations. The need for fairer, more transparent partnerships became a rallying cry for many African leaders and activists. The future of BRICS in Africa remains uncertain as the continent grapples with balancing the potential benefits of these partnerships against the risks of exploitation and dependency. The hope is that through increased awareness and advocacy, a more equitable and just framework for international cooperation can be established. The story of BRICS in Africa is a complex one, filled with both promise and peril. As the continent moves forward, the lessons learned from these engagements will be crucial in shaping a more sustainable and inclusive future. As the hidden truths of BRICS's engagement in Africa came to light, a wave of strategic reawakening swept across the continent. African governments, policymakers, and civil society organizations began to push back against exploitative practices and assert their own development priorities. Debt renegotiations emerged as a key tool for African countries seeking to regain control of their economic destinies. Countries like Zambia and Ethiopia engaged in tough negotiations with their BRICS creditors, seeking debt relief and more favorable repayment terms. At the same time, African governments began to implement stricter investment laws and regulations. These measures aimed to ensure that foreign investments, including those from BRICS countries, created jobs, protected the environment, and resulted in a fairer distribution of profits. Recognizing the importance of a united front, African nations also intensified efforts to strengthen regional blocs like the African Union. A stronger and more integrated Africa, it was believed, would be better positioned to negotiate with external partners, including BRICS. Section 4. Shifting Sands. The geopolitical implications of Africa's resurgence. Africa's strategic reawakening sent ripples across the geopolitical landscape. BRICS, once accustomed to dealing with a more passive and accommodating Africa, was forced to adjust to a new reality. The continent's newfound assertiveness challenged the narrative of South-South cooperation that BRICS had carefully cultivated. Within BRICS itself, Africa's changing dynamics exposed underlying tensions and competing interests. China's dominance in infrastructure financing and resource extraction created friction with other BRICS members, particularly India, which harbored its own ambitions in Africa. Western powers, once dominant players in Africa, observed these developments with a mix of apprehension and opportunity. The European Union and the United States, seeking to counter BRICS's growing influence, began to offer alternative development partnerships, emphasizing grants, technology sharing, and good governance. Africa's evolving relationship with BRICS also highlighted the limitations of the grouping's ability to challenge the existing global order. Despite its rhetoric of creating a multipolar world, BRICS struggled to present a united front on key global issues, undermining its efforts to offer a viable alternative to the Western-led system. Section 5. A New Dawn for Africa Towards Fairer Partnerships and Global Influence. The unraveling of BRICS's initial promise to Africa marked a turning point in the continent's relationship with the emerging global power. This shift was not just a political maneuver but a profound realization of Africa's potential and the need for more equitable partnerships. While BRICS's engagement brought undeniable benefits, particularly in infrastructure development, it also highlighted the continent's growing pains and the complexities of rapid modernization. However, it also exposed the risks of unchecked foreign influence and the importance of strategic autonomy. African nations began to understand that true progress required not just external investments but also internal resilience and self-reliance. As Africa enters a new era, it does so with a greater awareness of its own value and a determination to chart its own course. The youth in particular are driving this change, leveraging technology and innovation to create new opportunities. The continent is no longer content to be a passive recipient of aid or a source of raw materials for external powers. Instead, it is focusing on adding value to its resources and ensuring that its people benefit directly from its wealth. Africa is actively shaping its own destiny, seeking partnerships that are truly mutually beneficial and that advance its own development priorities. These partnerships are based on respect, equality, and shared goals. This strategic reawakening is giving rise to a more confident and assertive Africa, one that is not afraid to voice its aspirations and demand its rights on the global stage. Africa is ready to claim its rightful place on the global stage. It is no longer a silent observer but an active participant in shaping global policies and decisions. The journey ahead will not be without its challenges. The road to true independence and prosperity is fraught with obstacles both internal and external. However, by leveraging its vast potential, strengthening regional integration, and engaging with a diverse range of partners, Africa is laying a solid foundation for sustainable growth. Africa is well positioned to navigate the complexities of the 21st century and emerge as a force for progress and prosperity. The future is bright, and the possibilities are endless for a continent that is finally coming into its own.